Who's Cousins' backup?
Trevor Siemian.
Oh, well. There you go. I want to talk about who are the next Eagles. And I think to start
Do
with...
you?
Well, I think the Eagles are still pretty good, but what I think is important is to kind of actually set the stage of the conversation that we're talking about, what that means. As a fan last year, I think that was an example of how much luck has to do with a successful NFL team, to say nothing of winning a Super Bowl. The fact that Nick Foles played as well as he did after Carson Wentz went down was, to some extent, not luck, but it was good fortune, right? The fact that they were able to assemble a running back core that churned up other teams that way was kind of anachronistic, I think, for our time, like the time that we associate with this high octane, tons of passing attempts offense. So I guess the question is, like, what does the next Eagles look like? What is the next sort of like, oh, they made these 3 adjustments. They had a core of talent that they added to with short-term contracts without like weighing themselves down. They drafted wisely, but not brilliantly, but it was fine. And then they had really good quarterback play and good coaching, essentially. But who's the next team that maybe is going to surprise us in that way?
The short answer is there is no team like that, because that was the marriage of a million different little trends that all came together for one team. Yeah. Howie Roseman knew exactly what he was doing. Doug Peterson was forward-thinking enough as a coach to install some of those schemes. Nick Foles was a competent backup who could really just execute exactly what Doug wanted to do. And then Carson Wentz was good enough, and this is the key to the whole thing, he was good enough to lock up a number 1 seed so early.
Yes, Nick was the closer. Like, that's all he had to do.
But what happened then is that gave them essentially 3 weeks to run another training camp before the playoffs started to get those schemes installed. Mm-hmm. And so without that, if they had played in the first round of the playoffs, everything changes. So you have to look at just the teams that are very deep and could win with a backup quarterback. And I don't see a whole lot of them. I think that the Vikings could do it. I think that there's the capability. You could make the argument that if it's the scheme that matters.
Who's Cousins' backup?
Trevor Siemian.
Oh, well. There you go.
Touchdown Trevor.
But we would have laughed at Nick Foles this time last year.
I don't know. Nick Foles was pretty good a couple years ago. I mean, like...
Case Keenum made the NFC Championship game with the Vikings.
Yeah.
Guys, the answer is the Jets.
Yes!
Green uniforms, 3 elite quarterbacks, vaguely in the tri-state area.
Yeah. Forward-thinking coach.
They made some free agent moves that everyone laughed at originally.
Exactly.
Right. And then maybe they ended up well.
Wait, which moves? Terrell Pryor?
Well,
we're still laughing at
essentially
Terrell Pryor.
everything they've done.
I think a lot of people laughed at their quarterback decisions, right? Like, they brought Bridgewater in, then they drafted Darnold, and they already had McCown, and it was just like, what are they doing at quarterback? But at the same time, now you've got 3 quarterbacks who could start, and so, I don't know, I'm talking about the Eagles last year, when they brought in like a guy like Patrick Robinson. I remember reading some of the, what Eagles writers thought of that. Like, they were like, this guy's not even going to play.
Yeah.
He ended up being a really crucial part of their defense. And I think there was a few, free agency and trades, things like that ended up kind of changing the dynamic of the Eagles and making them a lot better than I think anyone expected. I think if you're talking about teams that are going to go from worst to first, the Eagles were not worse, but they were in last place the year before and then ended up winning the division, winning the Super Bowl. I think you got to look at a team like the Texans, who have so much change based on obviously getting guys back from injury. They made some key moves in free agency. I think if you get like Honey Badger back to what he was earlier in his career, that could be something we look back on in a year and be like, how is this not a bigger story?
The difference there is that we've seen the Texans with a backup quarterback, and it's not pretty.
Right. And they didn't do anything really to answer that.
But it's also second year. I mean, obviously Deshaun Watson's coming off of an injury, but the second year, Carson Wentz went from being like an average quarterback to
I think there were still
the best quarterback in the NFL.
Yeah, there were still. I think people still were like, "Is Carson Wentz?"
Like, I don't think.
Legit?
Did you expect Carson Wentz to be that good?
No, I think but that was like the incredible combination of you can have someone. Maybe it's better to have someone young at quarterback with veteran playmakers around him, like Alshon Jeffrey, than it is to have somebody who's a veteran quarterback with a bunch of guys who don't know what they're doing because they're just in the league. You know what I mean? And I was kind of thinking about this a little bit in regards You're talking about like getting from the basement to the ceiling.
Yeah, I mean, if we take away the whole like you're going to win a Super Bowl with the backup, like take away that rubric.
I think the sexiest pick would be the Niners, right?
Yeah.
You know,
they had the schemes to do it, which is very Eagles-esque.
Right. I mean, and it's just like they call it. Like, I don't know whether you want to give them that 6-win streak or whatever they had at the end of last year because people were looking at booking vacations by that point. But
they're the Jaguars.
But they're gonna come into this season with like moderate expectations, a weakened division, and a quarterback who we're finally gonna see for a full campaign.
Also second-year coach.
And a second-year coach who everybody seems to think is the reincarnation of Bill Walsh.
Yeah, I think the 49ers are not a bad pick because it's the other sort of thing which you guys have both written about is that like Doug Peterson became like a scheme lord in his second year. So projecting like,
I want to use that more.
Right.
Projecting supposed milquetoast coach to becoming this like forward-thinking progressive
He's got his own coaching
tree.
I
actually do think Bill O'Brien has a case to be that because we don't think of Bill O'Brien as an innovator much, but when you look at some of his spread schemes he used with Deshaun Watson, they were really cool, and a full season of that could be very interesting.
I think you're right, but I'm so terrified of their line. Like,
I'm terrified of every line in the NFL except like the Eagles, and the Cowboys.
What about the Titans? What about the Titans?
I think
the Titans is a candidate for they're going to add some wrinkles because they have a different offense.
Their offensive coordinator is Matt LaFleur, who's never really
called plays before.
Yeah, let's just say that. He was with Kyle Shanahan in Atlanta, and then he was McVay's offensive coordinator.
But Doug wasn't calling plays in Kansas City, right?
They'd let Doug call some plays.
Oh, okay.
They let him.
But like if you look at let's look at the Titans.
Let's
look at the Titans from sort of this perspective. Look at what the Rams did last year, bringing McVay in. I thought Goff was a bust.
Yeah.
His rookie year was as
he
bad.
was a bust.
Yeah. And he turned that whole offense around, and it was a scheme thing. It was because he was a scheme lord, is the word I'm going to start using now. And I mean, it was all about like utilizing your players how they're supposed to be utilized and making them, giving them situations that make it easier for them. Part of that was the pre-snap. They'd go to the line, and McVay would be in Goff's ear telling him what to audible to, and that kind of just took a huge, huge weight off his shoulders. Now, put that in with Mariota. If, say, LaFleur does that, LaFleur also has history with Shanahan, so he could kind of like meld those two offenses together. I think you can build an argument that the Titans could make an enormous leap on offense.
And they do have a good line, and they do have some
They
good...
added Deion Lewis.
Yeah.
On defense, they have Malcolm Butler, so they'll be a little better.
Yeah.
Just adding Patriots players.
Their defense isn't actually that bad either. I mean, they've got some pass rushers. They're secondary. They've added guys in free agency.
Yep.
And they have a good DC, right?
What's that?
They have a good DC too, right? Like Pease is good, right?
Yeah, and Mike Vrabel's good.
Yeah.
Will Vrabel get upset at them not playing real football though?
Like he did at the Wild. I thought that was when I heard that anecdote. I was like, they're going to be running RPOs all over the place. I wonder if he's just
must have changed his whole like worldview after that game. So
what are some other teams that you guys see who were bottom feeders last year? I
want to throw out one. I'm not on like the bandwagon for this yet, but I think the Broncos could be a team people are overlooking at this point. Let's go through it.
You're overlooking them.
Last year, their offense was 31st in DVOA. They were a terrible offense, and obviously you saw the quarterbacks they had to deal with. Keenum, I don't know if he'll necessarily be what he was.
I love Case Keenum.
I don't know if he'll be what he was last year, but if he can just be a league average quarterback, that could make their offense take a huge jump.
He can do that.
And their defense is still good. I mean, they still got Bradley Roby and Chris Harris in the secondary. They've got some good safeties. They just got Bradley Chubb in the draft to pair with Von Miller. I mean, they could potentially have a really good pass rush. And so kind of put it all together, they're another team I think that could be a little bit better than people are giving them credit for. If their offense can just be not one of the worst in the NFL, like they could make a pretty big jump.
The other thing about the Eagles is that they are sort of part of this super team race, right?
Right.
So, like, do we have to talk about the Rams?
We have to talk about the Rams because the Rams were directly influenced by the Eagles and the fact that the fact that the cap kept rising $10 million every year, and we used to view free agency as a very bad thing in the NFL. And then Howie Roseman said, wait, we have all this cap space, might as well get Alshon Jeffrey, might as well get, talent at every position, just augment that stuff. And so I think that I do think that the Rams as far as just understanding that you build to the draft, but you can also augment it really well in the modern NFL.
But as somebody who lived through the bad version of the super team with Philadelphia,
dream
team,
that was
break
before.
bad.
That was in a different cap era.
Sure, but like
was
there
Ronnie
is a
Brown.
scenario in which things don't go well in Los
Sure.
Angeles, and a bunch of guys who are like, I'm playing on a 1-year deal are kind of like taking or looking towards
Sure.
next season,
I
right?
will say the one thing is that the fact that we let Vince Young say dream team because they signed him and Ronnie Brown, like it's like a third no ACL Ronnie Brown at that point. I just feel like we really let that get out of hand.
Was that the Namdi team?
Yeah. I had a T-shirt that was like a Run DMC T-shirt, but it said Nam DMC for Namdi and Dominique Rogers, DRC, Dominique Rogers Cromartie.
Do you still have that?
I think so, somewhere. Yeah, DRC.
That would be my go-to shirt.
Yeah, it's a little tight. like a lot of those guys, I've sort of aged out of that shirt.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
It's kind of like when I have a shirt that says Alston 316 from Ray for Alston. And I still wear that a lot.
I just own an authentic Mark Sanchez jersey.
Which is the ultimate bit.
Game worn.